I'd love to start with you setting the scene for us. 2.5 months to go to the election. Biden has picked Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate. We've got the Democratic conventions happening this week. What is the threat landscape? What are you most concerned about right now?
Sure. Thanks for having me back. I think I want to focus mostly on the threat landscape I see online, because otherwise there's so many threats that are potentially happening. And one of the biggest concerns is this is just not going to be an election like any other. We're voting in the middle of a pandemic. We're not likely to have results ready on November 3rd. And so what I'm very concerned about is, how does that play out online? How are we going to deal with all of the disinformation and misinformation that is going to really stir people up, especially after November 3rd? And so I am really looking at sort of, what is Facebook? What is Twitter? How are they looking at these threats? And, to set the stage a bit, it's really a bit frustrating that we are at this point and we're having this conversation now when they have had 4 years to think about how their platforms are really being manipulated and used to sow this kind of distrust. So, I'm happy to go through some of the ideas and things that we're thinking about in terms of how social media might affect this all, but I want to be really clear. Any recommendations between now and November are sort of these emergency things that the platforms can do. Whereas what I'd really like to see someday, maybe after November, is the larger conversation about the systemic issues that have made these platforms where they are today and have made this rampant disinformation about voting, about things that are so important, so ripe to begin with.
We've got the Democratic conventions happening this week. Senator Kamala Harris now on Biden's ticket. Does that sort of ratchet up the activity or the urgency now that it seems more real?
Yeah, there's no question, right? We've already seen how some people are using this moment to try to spread crazy disinformation about her. That shouldn't be surprising that that's going to happen. But again, it's up to how are the heads of these platforms going to deal with that. But yeah, it is go time. And people, I think it's really important to remember, people will start voting in September, right? Like, we're talking about November 3rd, but since so many people are going to be voting through the mail, I would like us to consider that the election is starting in September. And so we don't have a lot of time to figure out, how do we build trust? How do we make this safe? How do we make this secure? And there's so many elements, but it's urgent. It is go time.
You recently released a report on what platforms can do to protect the vote amidst this surge of misinformation on Facebook, on Twitter, et cetera. What should they be doing that they're not doing?
So yes, we put together some ideas. And again, these are immediate steps as opposed to the systemic issues. Let's look at Facebook. Since that is where I worked, that is also what I know best. Facebook has just announced, I think a few days ago, this new voting center. Now, it's great. I'm glad they have a new voting center. I am glad that they want to educate their users on what reliable content is. But the problem with that, it is still that it's users' responsibilities to click through to get to this voting information. What we would like to see, and it was a group of academics and real experts on misinformation and platforms, we put together 4 recommendations on top of what Facebook's already doing. One, they have got to clarify whether or not their voter suppression policies and their disinformation about voting policies apply to politicians. Because no matter what, all of these things we're talking about, they're all sort of tinkering around the margins of the real issue, and that's that they are allowing current politicians to lie about mail-in ballots, about voting procedures. So first, they've got to clarify that.
On that note, Yael, before we go any further, do you think Facebook should be taking down some of the president's posts rather than just sending people to a voter information center that has what they say is more accurate information? Some of these posts from President Trump are now, circulating on the platform, and they're forever perpetuating, like you say, potential untruths.
So I want to start by saying I do not want to claim that this is easy. There is no easy answer to this particular question. However, if Facebook has a policy where they say that we will not allow anybody to lie about or to post disinformation about voting procedures, voting places, voting times, all of those things can be considered voter suppression, then why are they not applying it to the president? Now, the president also has some posts that skate a fine line, right? If he says that mail-in ballots are going to cause a fraudulent election, well, there's plenty of evidence that mail-in ballots do not, but he can sort of word it so it's looking like an opinion for the future, and then Facebook can't really fact check that. But they can do other things. Instead of these labels that they're applying to everybody, which creates a false equivalency, it makes it sound like every post is being treated equal, they could at least make sure it's not amplified, it's not boosted, these posts aren't targeted towards anybody. They could flood the zone with, as soon as one of Trump's posts comes out, the very next thing you see is an accurate piece of information about voting. I mean, there's lots of creative ways. At the end of the day, though, I do not agree with Mark Zuckerberg's decision to say that he won't fact check politicians, but I'm happy to try to make recommendations to, well, so what else can you do since you are doubling down on that policy that the civil rights community, your own employees, advertisers, so many people have said is dangerous.
So what else can they do? I mean, I know you focused on political advertising. Should they be taking political ads at all?
So that one's, I'm not advocating to stop taking political ads because then you actually do hurt smaller parties. I mean, in the future, I'd like us to reconsider the entire political advertising landscape. And I want to really be clear. The US government has failed on this as well, because we do have laws about political advertising that apply to newspapers and to media, that they just have never updated those laws to apply to political advertising online. So the US government bears some responsibility in that as well. But no, I do think they should still allow political ads right now. I think we've talked a lot about the dangers of how their targeting tools work, though. Should they allow a political ad with a lie in it to be hyper-targeted towards a certain community that might be particularly vulnerable or susceptible to that lie? That's the real danger. But some of the other things they can do, again, it's this labeling policy that they have right now where they're going to put labels on every post. It, in my opinion, creates even more confusion because they're not saying this post is true or this post is false. They're not making any claim on it. They're just saying this is about voting. You want to go get more information, go to our voting center. And that, A, you're forcing your users to have to click through to search for more information. And B, you're not even making a call, but you could also, what I call and others call, flood the zone. Flood the zone with the reliable information, right? State officials, elections, commissions, this, content from nonpartisan sources about voting. If you put as much of that in our feeds as this misinformation, at least you're putting it right in front of our faces instead of putting on us have to click through to go find it. So that's another idea.
So you've also said that, Twitter needs to do more as well. Jack Dorsey needs to have a better answer on what to do if President Trump, for example, declares victory when the election hasn't officially been called. Bottom line, do you think that Facebook and Twitter are tilting the odds in favor of President Trump based on the way their policies work right now?
Well, they're different platforms. And I will say, just on the surface, it does look like Twitter is willing to take bigger risks to make the call about protecting our election at possibly a cost to their own relationship with this administration. Yeah. They have the potential to tilt the scales. Like, do I think that either Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg have sat down and said, I want President Trump to win and therefore I'm going to do this? No. Do I think that Mark Zuckerberg has doubled down so much on his personal ideology of, I won't censor anybody? Again, it's not censorship. A, you're a private platform, and B, not allowing lies to be amplified and boosted is not censorship. But they have the potential to tilt the scales. If they continue to let President Trump put out incredible amounts of disinformation about mail-in voting, and let's be real, November 3rd onwards to me is actually more concerning. If November 3rd hits and results will not be in, the American people need to accept we will not have results on November 3rd. But here's where they could tilt the scales. If on November 3rd, one candidate is ahead because more of his voters voted in person, and one candidate appears to be behind because more of those voters voted by mail, the American public could get a message if the media and social media starts pumping that out. And then it could take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to count all the mail-in ballots. If Facebook allows let's be frank, President Trump to start messaging to his supporters that he won, look, I won, and then starts claiming that all this mail-in ballots coming in is all fraud. To me, that's tilting the scales in a dangerous way, because then people are going to be angry. I mean, I can just play out in my mind what that might end up leading to. So Facebook has a huge decision to make about what are they going to also do as of November 3rd onwards to prevent that from happening.